Okay, today I'm going to teach you how to make wheat bread with natural yeast. And the reason that I do natural yeast is because it helps you to not get yeast infections because it's such a slow growing yeast. And it also helps people to be able, who are gluten intolerant, to be able to digest it because your bread soaks all day long. And so the grain is already digested a lot, the gluten's already digested. And so I have a lot of friends who've been able to eat gluten if they have it with natural yeast that's been soaking all day. So this is my natural yeast, and I feed it every Monday and Thursday. So I keep it in the fridge with a coffee filter and an elastic on top so that it can breathe. And before I bake, so Monday and Thursday are my baking days. So I drain off any water that's in it into the sink. And then I always make 6 loaves of bread. And so for 6 loaves of bread, I use 3 cups of natural yeast. Now a Bosch can hold 6 loaves of bread, the amount for a dough, but a KitchenAid can't. So if you have a KitchenAid, you're going to need to do the 4 loaf or the 2 loaf recipe. Or if you just have blenders in a bowl, you'll have to use the 2 loaf recipe. But I always make 6 because I have 6 kids, so we eat it. I measure 3 cups of natural yeast for my recipe. And then whatever I have left, which that looks like it is about 2.5 cups. So whatever is left, I will then put in 2.5 cups of water and 2.5 cups of more flour and stir it up and put it back in the fridge. So I'll do that in a minute. Okay, so to start my bread, over here I'm going to put my natural yeast into my Bosch, and then I just start adding all my ingredients. And my first ingredient is 6 cups of wheat flour and 6 cups of warm water. And so you want your water to be, and it doesn't matter the order of your ingredients, you just get all the ingredients in. You want your water to be lukewarm. So I don't turn it all the way hot, but I don't put it on the medium either. I go halfway in between, kind of like bath water. So I'm going to put all my ingredients into the Bosch. So 6 cups of water, 6 cups of wheat flour. So right now in my Bosch, I have beaters in there. So I'm going to put the flour, water, yeast, baking soda. By the way, the baking soda kind of gets rid of the sourdough taste a little bit, so it's not so sourdough. Then wheat gluten, which helps develop the elasticity of your bread. Powdered milk, salt, sugar, and oil. I'm going to put all of those in here with my beaters. And then I'm going to take my beaters out and I'm going to put my kneaders in and knead it with the last flour, the last half of flour, because otherwise it would hurt when I get that much dough in there, it will hurt it if I don't have these strong kneaders in. And I'm going to knead it for 7 minutes. Okay, so I added all the ingredients, and then I put in my kneaders for the last part of the flour, and I kneaded it for exactly 7 minutes. I've kind of timed it so that 7 minutes is exactly what I like to develop the gluten really well. And now what I'm going to do is, if I was only making 2 loaves, I would just leave it in here for 6 hours and just let it rise for 6 hours. But because I have 6 loaves in here, it will rise way too fast. And I want it to rise a full 6 hours. And so I have these other 2 bowls right here, and I'm gonna put a 2 loaf amount into each bowl. So I'll leave 2 loaf amount in here. I'll put a 2 loaf amount in here and a 2 loaf in here so that it can be raising for 6 hours. And then I'm going to feed my yeast and put it back in the fridge. So if you notice that you know that you've got enough flour if it pulls away from the sides of the bowl. So in here, it's still a really moist dough, but it pulled away from the sides of the bowl. And I don't like to over flour my bread because I don't like it to be dry. So I just usually oil my hands instead of flouring my hands, so that as I work with the dough, it doesn't stick to me. So I'm just going to divide this into thirds and take a third of it, put it in each bowl. Then after 6 hours, so in the afternoon, I usually do this in the morning around 8 or 9 in the morning. And then at like 3 in the afternoon, I grease my pans and I put them into the loaf pans. So I'm going to put them in these bowls here, and then I let them, I cover them up, I put the lids on them, and I let them rise. And then in here, remember I had 2.5 cups of batter left of the natural yeast. I'm going to add 2.5 cups. Come over here to my natural yeast. I'm going to add 2.5 cups of water to it and stir it up. And then 2.5 cups of flour. And I grind my flour and I dump it into just a huge 5-gallon bucket. I grind about enough that will last me for a couple weeks, so that I don't have to pull out the grinder every time. And we use white wheat, but sometimes I like red wheat too, but I just buy it at the Macy's K-Slot sale or at the cannery. So I stir this up and then I put my coffee filter back on top and I put it back in the fridge. I think it'd be better if you held it still. And remember, you feed your yeast with water and flour twice a week. And put the coffee filter back on. And put it back in the fridge. And then in about 6 hours, I get my pans at the dollar store. They're just 7.5 by 3.5 inches. And I grease them. And then I put my bread in them. And I let it rise for 3 more hours. So it's risen 9 hours total. And then I bake them for 35 minutes at 350. Then I take them out of the oven and let them cool. And then you can freeze them. And when we want to take them out of the freezer, we just microwave them for 2.5 minutes. Okay, so the bread has been rising for about 6 or 7 hours in little 2-loaf containers. And so now I'm going to form it. I greased my pans on the sides and on the back really good. Now I'm going to form it into loaves. And so the way I form it is I bend back.
Mom!
I bend back this, and then I make it just in a long oval and set it in. And they should fill up your pans about 1/2 to 2/3 full. And then they're going to rise. I'm going to cover them with a towel. And they're going to rise for another 3 hours. And by that time, they should be just barely above the pans. And then when you cook them, they'll bounce even a little bit higher. And I cook them 35 minutes at 350 or until they're brown and golden brown on top. I think the inside temperature needs to be about 180, 190. Then I immediately take them off and cool them on racks. Okay, these are the loaves after they have been rising for 3 more hours in the pans, and I just preheated the oven and I'm about to put them in the oven, and they'll get a little bit higher, but they're just barely above the pans. Here's how I get 6 to fit in the oven. I do 4 in the back and then 2 in the front, and I do it on the middle rack. Okay, I just pulled these 3 out of the oven and these 3 as well, but what I do right when I get them out of the oven is I use a rubber spatula and go around the sides so they don't stick to the sides, and then cool them on a rack. And you want to let them cool for about 15 minutes before you slice into them. The internal temperature is about 180 to 190 degrees. So you'll notice they're just slightly golden brown on the top. They're not a dark brown, and they're really moist bread.